The chamber was enormous. It had been built that way on purpose, tall enough to make every species inside it feel small, wide enough to remind everyone that the galaxy was larger than any one voice. 700 delegations sat in curved rows that rose toward the ceiling like the inside of a shell. The air tasted different in each section, sweet in some corners, sharp in others. The Vthcara section smelled like cold stone and old paper. Ambassador Sira Voss sat at the human table and did not look impressed. She had been in this chamber 6 times now. She had stopped being impressed after the second visit. The place was beautiful the way a very old, very certain thing is beautiful, sure of itself in a way that had stopped asking questions. She found that interesting. She also found it dangerous. She kept that thought behind her eyes and said nothing about it. Speaker Thalavos stood at the central podium. He had 7 limbs and skin the color of sea glass. He moved the way very important people move, like the room was already arranged around him before he arrived. He was reading from a long document, the kind of document that had taken a committee 4 months to produce and would take 4 minutes to deliver. Most of the chamber was half asleep. Voss was not. She was reading the same document on the small screen embedded in the table in front of her. She had read it twice already. She was reading it again now, slowly, the way you read something when you want to be very sure you understood it correctly the first time. She had. Thalavos reached the section on newly admitted species. There were 3. A fungal collective from the outer rim that communicated through spore patterns. A silicon-based civilization that had only recently discovered they were not alone in the universe and was still processing that information. And humanity. He read the fungal assessment. The chamber murmured politely. He read the silicon assessment. The chamber murmured again. He reached humanity. Homo sapiens, he said. The translator gave the words a formal weight they did not usually carry. Class 3 civilization, non-combatant status. He looked up, read the supporting notes. Assessment basis. The human species displays no standardized battle rituals. No formal declarations of engagement consistent with galactic military protocol. No honor combat traditions on record. Military history classified as irregular and outside recognized combat frameworks. Classification, non-combatant. Confirmed. He set the document down with the satisfaction of a man who has sorted a thing correctly. Voss wrote something on a piece of paper. Actual paper. She carried a small notebook everywhere. The other delegates had asked about it once. She had told them she thought better when she wrote by hand. They had found that charmingly primitive. She had smiled and let them. She folded the paper, slid it to her aide, a young man named Tors who had been with her for 3 years and had learned to read her handwriting under pressure. Tors unfolded it, read it, looked at her. She gave one small shrug. He folded it back up and held it. Thalavos finished the section. He set the document flat. He looked at the human delegation the way a professor looks at a student he does not expect to raise a hand. As a courtesy, he said, the Council invites any newly classified delegation to contest their assessment before the record is finalized. Are there objections from the fungal collective? There were none. From the Silicon civilization? There were none. He looked at Voss. From the human delegation? Sira Voss looked up from her screen. She had a face that gave nothing away for free. Whatever it cost to read her expression, most species could not afford it. She had cheekbones like the edge of something and eyes that had been watching things carefully for a very long time. She smiled. It was the smile of a long winter, polite, patient, not warm. We don't fight battles, she said. You've got that right. The translator carried it flat across the chamber. Several delegates looked at each other. The Kordai ambassador, 9 feet tall, plated in natural armor that his species had grown over 10,000 years of warfare, tilted his head a degree. His expression was unreadable, but he tilted his head. Thalavos nodded. He made a small notation on the record. No contest. Classification stands. He moved to the next agenda item. Tors leaned toward Voss. Very quietly, almost without moving his lips, he said, "You're really going to let them file that?" "I didn't say it was wrong," Voss said. She was already reading the next section of the document. "They think it means we're harmless." "I know what they think." Tors looked at the folded paper in his hand. He thought about opening it again and reading it a second time. He decided against it. What it said was, "They'll figure it out." Across the chamber, the Kordai ambassador was still watching the human table. He had been in more battles than most species had recorded. He had a sense, built from all of those battles, for the moment when something in a room shifted, when a thing that looked still was actually moving. He could not identify what he was sensing. He told himself it was nothing. The humans were small, soft creatures from a wet planet. They had no armor, no ritual, no battle name. They had not even contested their classification. He told himself that and almost believed it. Voss set down her screen. She looked up at the great vaulted ceiling of the chamber. 700 species in one room, most of them at peace, most of them reasonable, all of them running the same quiet calculation that every civilization runs when it meets something new. Are they a threat or are they not, and how do we know? The answer the council had just filed, not a threat, non-combatant, harmless. She had not corrected it. Correcting it would have required an explanation. The explanation would have raised questions. The questions would have required answers that this room was not ready to sit with. Better to let them have the word they wanted. Battle was never the right word anyway. She picked up her pen, wrote one more line in the notebook, closed it. Tors glanced at her. She didn't look up. Down at the podium, Thalavos was already deep into the next item. Resource allocations, trade routes, a minor territorial dispute between two species who had been arguing about the same asteroid belt for 200 years. The galaxy turned, business was done. The record was filed. Humanity Class 3, non-combatant. It sat in the galactic database next to the fungal collective and the Silicon civilization, and 4,000 other entries going back 6,000 years. It was very, very wrong. It was also, in every way that mattered, exactly right. She hadn't lied. She had just let them hear only the part of the truth they were already looking for. The rest of it would arrive later. It always did. The reports came in over 3 days. They came in the way bad news always comes, not all at once, which would at least be efficient, but in pieces. A fragment here, a silence where a signal should have been, then another fragment, then the silence getting wider. By the time the council called an emergency session, the picture was complete. Nobody wanted to look at it. The Vthcara had destroyed their 41st civilization. The name of that civilization was the Orvine. They had been a quiet people, small planet, modest technology, known across their region for a particular kind of fermented drink that other species traveled some distance to obtain. They had existed for 11,000 years. They had harmed no one. They had a word in their language for the specific feeling of watching rain come across a flat field from a long way off. That word was gone now, along with everything else. Thalavos stood at the podium. He looked older than he had 8 months ago. He read the Vthcara file the way a person reads something they have been dreading, carefully, because being careful is the only control left. The Vthcara were not a species in any way the galaxy recognized. They were a swarm, a distributed intelligence spread across billions of individual units, moving together the way a single thought moves across a single mind. They did not want land. They did not want resources in any conventional sense. They consumed biospheres and assimilated the knowledge inside them, the memories, the language, the history of whoever had lived there, and then they moved on. 41 civilizations. 600 years. The Kordai admiral stood to give his report. His name was Veth Commander Hraz, and he was the most decorated military officer in the current galactic record. His species had been fighting wars for 2,000 years and had never lost one. He had lost 3 battles to the Vthcara. He stood very straight when he said it. That was the only thing that told the room how much it cost him. He described the engagements. The first had been a standard defensive formation, well-tested, successful against every conventional enemy. The Vthcara had flowed around it the way water flows around a stone, not defeated, not blocked, simply irrelevant to them. The second had been a new strategy, aggressive, forward pressure. The Kordai had pushed into the swarm's leading edge with everything they had. The swarm had parted, closed behind them. The third engagement, Hraz did not describe in detail. He said only that the Kordai had fought beautifully. The chamber understood what he was not saying. Beautiful had not been enough. Around the room, every species with a military tradition was running the same quiet calculation. Their best weapon against the thing that had eaten 41 civilizations. Most of them arrived at the same answer. They did not like the answer. Thalavos opened the floor to strategic proposals. Class 1 and Class 2 combat civilizations were invited to submit options. There were 11 responses. They ranged from aggressive to desperate to one proposal, so extreme it required the chamber to take a 20-minute recess. None of them were good enough, and everyone in the room knew it. Commander Elias Drain sat beside Voss at the human table and read every proposal as it came in. He was a large, quiet man from coastal Georgia who spoke slowly not because he thought slowly, but because he had learned that people listened more carefully when you made them wait a little. He had a face like something left out in weather. Patient. Settled. He read the Kordai proposals, then the Velhari counter-proposals, then the aggressive option from the Esreth Alliance. He set down his screen. He picked up his coffee, actual coffee, another thing the other delegations found primitive, and drank it in 3 swallows. "They're trying to talk to it," he said, "with their guns." Voss didn't look up from her own screen. "I know. It doesn't speak gun. No. It doesn't speak anything they've tried. No." Drain set down his cup. He looked at the tactical displays at the front of the chamber, all those elegant formations, all those beautiful, careful, honored military traditions. 600 years of species trying to fight a thing that did not understand it was in a fight. He was already doing different math. He had been doing it since the second report came in, since the picture had started forming from pieces 48 hours ago. He had not slept since then, not because he couldn't, because the problem was more interesting than sleep. Thalavos finished the proposals. He looked across the chamber. He went species by species in the way a teacher goes student by student when the answer is not coming from the front row. His eyes reached the human table. He almost moved on. He stopped. Voss was writing in her notebook. She did not look up, but something in the way she was sitting, the particular stillness of a person who has already solved something and is waiting for the room to catch up, made him ask, "Does the human delegation have a proposal to offer?" The chamber got quieter, not because anyone expected a useful answer, because the silence was the easiest response to a question nobody had wanted to ask. Voss looked up. She finished the line she was writing. She tore the page out with one clean pull. She handed it to Tors. Tors crossed the chamber to the podium and placed it in front of Thalavos. Thalavos looked at it. 2 words. "Stand back." He looked at Voss. She had already gone back to her notebook. "This is your proposal," Thalavos said. "It is our request," Voss said, "for the other species when the time comes." The Kordai admiral turned in his seat. He looked at the human table with the full attention of a creature who had spent 2,000 years learning to recognize what was dangerous and what was not. He was not sure what he was looking at. "You have a plan," he said. It was not a question. "Commander Drain is working on it," Voss said. "Working on what specifically?" Voss looked at Drain. Drain looked at the Kordai admiral. Calm the way a deep river is calm, not still, just slow on the surface. "The problem," Drain said. The chamber sat with that. The Vthcara were somewhere in the outer systems, moving, patient, hungry in whatever way a distributed intelligence is hungry. Behind them, 41 civilizations that had existed and then stopped. In front of them, eventually, the Halcyon Corridor, 11 inhabited systems, billions of lives. And one human commander who had not slept in 2 days and was, by all appearances, not particularly worried. That was the part that stayed with the Kordai admiral after the session ended. Not the boldness of it, not the arrogance if it was arrogance. The fact that Drain had not looked afraid. In Hraz's experience, there were 2 kinds of creatures who did not look afraid: the ones who did not understand the danger, and the ones who had already decided what they were going to do about it. He had seen the first kind many times. He was not sure he had ever seen the second. He thought about the word non-combatant and the way it had sat in the record for 8 months without anyone questioning it. He thought he might need to learn a new word. He didn't know what it was yet. He went home. He pulled up the human military history, all of it from the beginning. He had looked at it once before briefly and found it irregular, undisciplined, no consistent format, no clear tradition. He looked at it again now, slower. 3 hours later, he set it down. He poured himself something strong. Irregular was the wrong word. The right word was total. Every war they had ever fought, they had fought until there was nothing left to fight. No ceasefire held forever. No boundary held forever. No enemy survived forever. They had ended things completely, without elegance, without ritual. Over and over and over. He thought about the Vthcara. He thought about stand back. He drank. The council authorization came through on a Tuesday. Support assistance, logistics, medical ships, communication relays, standard non-combatant support package consistent with humanity's classification. The paperwork was clean and correct and filed in triplicate. Thalavos signed it himself. He felt briefly generous. The humans were modest creatures, but they were willing to help, and there was value in that. The USCF acknowledgement came back within the hour. Confirmed deployment underway. Thalavos moved to the next item on his desk. 3 weeks passed. The Vthcara moved through the outer systems at the pace of something that had never been hurried. They did not rush because they had never needed to. They consumed one small colony station on the edge of the Halcyon Corridor's outer boundary, and the record of it arrived in fragments. A distress signal, then silence, then the particular kind of silence that meant there was nothing left to send a signal. The Council combat species were staging their forces. The Kordai took the front. They always took the front. It was their history and their pride, and they would not be moved from it. Other military civilizations arranged behind them. It was a large, serious, well-organized force. It was also, though nobody said this, the last option anybody had. Council Intelligence Officer Erie SSS was a small, precise creature who communicated partly through color shifts in her outer membrane. She was good at her job because she noticed things other people filed away as unimportant. She had been monitoring all Allied fleet movements for the past 3 weeks. It was routine. She was thorough. She noticed the humans. She sat with the data for 6 hours before she brought it to Thalavos. She wanted to be certain she was reading it right. She read it 4 more times. She was reading it right. Thalavos was in a strategy session when she arrived. She waited outside the door. She was patient. She had learned patience working for the council. She had also learned that some things were worth interrupting a strategy session for. This was one of them. She handed him the file when he came out. He looked at it. His 7 limbs went still in the way they went still when he was processing something he did not immediately understand. The human asterisk logistics ships had repositioned. Not toward the Allied fleet. Not toward any supply line that connected to any Allied position. They had moved into the Halcyon corridor from a separate entry point and spread out in a pattern that looked, if you squinted at it, like a net being pulled across an opening. The asterisk medical frigates had unusual energy signatures. The kind of signatures that came from equipment that was running hard over a long period, not communication equipment, not medical equipment. Something else. The supply lines extended in 4 directions that had no Allied forces waiting at the end of them. Thalavos looked at the map for a long time. He called Vas. She answered on the second signal. She was at her desk. Behind her, through the window, he could see the lights of whatever city the human delegation was currently based in. She looked unsurprised to hear from him. She had, he realized, been expecting this call for some time. "Ambassador," he said, "I'm looking at your fleet positioning. I see that. Your logistics ships are not on any authorized supply route. No. Your medical frigates are running energy outputs inconsistent with medical operations." That's accurate. He waited. She did not fill the silence. He had noticed this about her. She was comfortable in silences that made other species nervous. She did not rush to explain herself. She waited for the specific question, and she answered only that. "Ambassador Voss," he said carefully, "what is Commander Drain doing?" "Working," she said. "On what?" She looked at him through the screen. Her face was the same face it always was, patient, careful, giving nothing away that wasn't asked for directly. "The problem," she said. He pulled up the authorization he had signed. Support assistance, logistics, medical. He read it again. He thought about how those words had seemed straightforward when he signed them. "These ships are not performing support functions," he said. "They are performing exactly the function they were designed for," Voss said. "The design was not specified in the authorization request." He stared at her. "You did not lie to the council," he said slowly. "I would not lie to the council. But you did not tell the council what these ships were. You didn't ask." She said it without sharpness, without apology, like a person pointing out that the window was open, a simple fact, available to anyone who looked. He thought about the authorization he had signed. He thought about how satisfied he had felt signing it. The small, generous feeling of including the humble non-combatants in a moment that was bigger than them. He felt considerably less satisfied now. "What are the supply lines for?" he said. "Delivery." "Of what?" She paused, not because she was deciding whether to answer, because she was deciding how much of the answer was useful to give him at this point. "We identified what the Vthcara need to function as a swarm," she said. "The quantum resonance that holds the distributed intelligence together. It requires specific conditions, stable conditions. We've been disrupting those conditions throughout the corridor for 21 days. He looked at the map, at the net shape the human ships had made. He looked at it from a new angle. Not a supply net. A trap. They had been seeding the corridor for 3 weeks, before the Council combat fleet had finished staging, before the Cordai had taken position, before anyone had fired a single shot. "You began this before the Council authorized anything," he said. "We began preparation," she said, "the day you filed our classification." He went still. "That was 8 months ago," he said. "Yes. The Vthcara were not in Council territory 8 months ago. No, she said, but they were going to be. The room was quiet. Outside his window, the council complex spread out across the landscape, buildings and infrastructure representing 6,000 years of galactic civilization learning to exist together. Species that had once fought wars now sharing trade routes. A long, careful, hard-won peace. You looked at the Vthcara's trajectory, he said. 8 months ago, before the emergency session, before the 41st civilization, before Hraz lost 3 battles. We looked at the data available to us, she said. Yes. And you began preparing. We prepare, she said. When we see a problem, we do not wait for authorization to think. He looked at the mineral formation on his desk. It sat where it always sat, small and dark and pretty. A gift from the Orvine delegation, the last time they had sent a delegation anywhere. They had been proud of it. The mineral was only found on their planet, formed by a specific combination of their geology and their weather and 10,000 years of their particular planet doing what it did. There was no more of it being made. The Chordai are at the front, he said. They believe they are the primary force. Voss said nothing. They are not the primary force, he said. She kept saying nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Thalavos looked at the map again. He looked at the elegant, honorable, well-organized combat fleet arranged at the corridor entrance. He looked at the human ships spread invisibly behind and around and beneath the corridor in a shape that was only a shape if you knew what you were looking for. He thought about what it felt like to be a stone in a river that had been very patiently, very quietly redirected around you. He thought about the classification. Non-combatant. You do not fight battles, he said. We have been saying this, she said. What do you do then, if not battle? She looked at him, she took a breath. We finish things, she said. He sat with that for a long time after the call ended. He looked at the mineral formation. He thought about 41 civilizations that had met the Vthcara and fought and were gone. He thought about one species that had looked at the same problem and asked a completely different question. Not asterisk how do we fight it? What does it need to exist, and how do we take that away? He did not sleep much that night. In the corridor, the human ships held their positions and kept doing the quiet, invisible, patient work of making the trap perfect. They had been at it for 21 days. They had 11 more to go. They were not rushing. They never rushed. They just finished. The Vthcara entered the Halcyon corridor at 3:40 hours, Council Standard Time. They came in the way they always came, not like an army, not like a fleet, not like anything that had a name in any military manual in the galactic database. They came like weather, a rolling mass of individual units, billions of them, moving with a single mind behind them. No formation, no hesitation, no signal transmitted before entry. They simply arrived. On the tactical displays at the Council monitoring station, they looked like a stain spreading across water. Thalavos watched the displays from the council chamber. Around him, 24 senior staff stood at their stations. Nobody was sitting. Nobody had been sitting for 6 hours. The room smelled like the particular tension of people who were very aware that what happened in the next few hours was the kind of thing that divided history into before and after. The Chordai fleet moved to intercept. Hraz took the front as he always did. He had fought 3 battles against this thing and lost all 3, and he was at the front anyway because that was what the Chordai did. You did not stop being what you were because you had been hurt by something. You faced it again. Differently if you were smart, but you faced it. His fleet opened fire. The Vthcara swarm responded in its usual way. It flowed. It bent around the Chordai fire like smoke bends around a hand passing through it. Units at the leading edge were destroyed. Hundreds, thousands. The swarm did not slow. It did not adjust. It simply had more units than the Chordai had fire, and it kept coming. On the council displays, the battle looked the way the previous three had looked. Beautiful, fierce, losing. Thalavos watched it. He gripped the edge of his console. He looked at the human fleet positions. They had not moved. "Voss," he said into the comm, "the Kordai are engaged, your fleet has not." "We know," Voss said. Her voice was the same as it always was. A flat Nebraska calm that currently felt like the most unsettling sound in the galaxy. "The Kordai are taking damage." "We know." "Then why?" 91%, Drain's voice came across the line. He was somewhere inside the corridor, on one of the ships that had been sitting still for 32 days. "I need 94. Thalavos looked at the displays. He looked at the shape of the Vthcara swarm as it pressed against the Kordai line. He understood. The Kordai were not the defense. They were the funnel. Every response the Vthcara made to the Kordai fire, every adjustment, every flowing movement, every redistribution of units, was pushing more of the swarm deeper into the corridor, into the space the human ships had been seeding for 32 days. The space where the conditions the swarm needed had been, quietly and invisibly, taken away. The Kordai were hurting them. They did not know they were hurting them. Raz was fighting with everything he had, and every move he forced the swarm to make was exactly the move Drain needed it to make. Thalavos thought about the paper. Stand back. He had read it as a request for space, for room for the humans to do their support work without the other species getting in the way. It was a request for the other species to do their job without knowing it was a different job. 92, Drain said. On the display, the Kordai fleet was pulling back by design or desperation. Thalavos could not tell which. The swarm pressed forward, deeper. 93. A junior staff member at Thalavos's right said, "Sir, should we signal the Kordai to?" "No," Thalavos said. She looked at him. "Let them keep doing what they're doing," he said. She looked back at the display. She did not fully understand why. She filed it away. 94, Drain said. A pause, 2 seconds, 3. Close it. Nothing visible happened. That was the thing about it, there was nothing to see. No weapon fired. No explosion. No signal visible on any display. The human ships, still in their net formation throughout the corridor, simply activated. What they had been seeding for 32 days released. All of it simultaneously from every position, filling the corridor with something that had no name in galactic weapons taxonomy because it was not a weapon. It was an absence. A very specifically engineered absence of the exact conditions the Vthcara needed to remain a Vthcara. The quantum resonance that held 1 billion units into one mind, the thing that made the swarm a swarm, that made the intelligence distributed rather than just scattered, required stability. Consistent, layered, maintained stability, like a signal that had to travel through a clear channel. Disrupt the channel enough in the right ways at the right frequencies, across a wide enough area. The signal broke. Not one piece of it. All of it. The swarm stopped. On the tactical display, it did not look like a battle ending. It did not look like anything the display had visual grammar for. The units were still there, billions of individual bodies, physically intact. But the thing behind them was gone. The mind was gone. The billion-unit intelligence that had consumed 41 civilizations in 600 years came apart at every connection simultaneously, like a sentence dissolving back into letters, like letters dissolving back into marks, like marks dissolving back into nothing that meant anything. The corridor went quiet. 3 minutes and 40 seconds from activation to completion. On the council display, the swarm showed as static, then as debris, then as nothing relevant. Nobody in the council monitoring room spoke. Thalavos counted 11 seconds of silence. He knew he counted them because he remembered each one afterward, the way you remember the seconds after something large falls. Raz's calm line opened. What? A pause. The particular sound of a very experienced commander, finding that his vocabulary did not have the right shape for what he was looking at. What did you do? Drain's line was still open. There was a brief, mundane sound, something being unwrapped, a moment of chewing. He had been eating a sandwich. That'll do it, Drain said. Thalavos sat down, slowly, in the way a person sits down when their legs have decided to stop waiting for permission. He looked at the display, at the corridor that had been, 6 minutes ago, the site of what everyone expected to be the galaxy's most significant military defeat. Total was the word the Kordai admiral had used when he'd pulled the human military history and read it properly the second time. Thalavos understood now. Not total in the sense of large, not total in the sense of brutal. Total in the sense of complete, final. Not a battle that was won, but a problem that was solved so thoroughly the problem could not reform. 41 civilizations had fought the Vthcara. One had finished it. He opened a line to Vas. She answered. He looked at her on the screen for a moment before he said anything. He was trying to find the right question. There were many questions and they were all jostling against each other, and he could only ask one first. You planned this, he said, all of it, the positioning, the seating, using the Kordai as a funnel without telling them. You planned this before the emergency session, before the authorization, before any of us understood what we were dealing with. Vas looked at him, patient, steady. We saw a problem, she said. 8 months ago. Yes. Before anyone asked you to. We don't wait to be asked, she said. We see the problem and we work on the problem, and when the time comes, we finish the problem. He thought about the 41 civilizations. About the 600 years the galaxy had spent watching civilizations fight a thing and lose. About all the tactical brilliance and military honor and well-organized defenses that had not been enough because they were all asking asterisk, how do we fight, when the answer required a completely different question. The Kordai, he said, when they find out they were a distraction. They weren't a distraction, Vas said. They were essential. Without them driving the swarm to 94% density inside the containment area, none of it works. Raz did his job exactly right. He just didn't know what job he was doing. Thalavos thought about that. He thought about a warrior who had fought 3 battles and lost and showed up for a 4th anyway, and in doing so had provided the one thing the final solution required. He thought about what he would say to Raz. He thought about what new word the galaxy was going to need. Outside in the corridor, 11 systems were still there. Billions of lives still going. People buying things and raising children and complaining about the weather, none of them knowing the name Drain or Vas or what had happened in the 48 hours before everything stayed normal. It had always been normal, because someone had been working on keeping it that way since 8 months before the problem arrived. Thalavos looked at his desk. At the mineral formation from the Orvine planet, the 41st civilization. He picked it up for the first time since it had been given to him. It was cold and smooth and heavier than it looked. He held it for a long time. The chamber was fuller than it had been in 40 years. Every delegation present, in person, no remote attendance, no proxy signals, no representatives sending their secondary staff. The ambassadors came themselves, and they came early, and they sat in their seats with the particular alertness of people who did not want to miss whatever was about to happen. Word had spread, the way things spread in a body made of 700 civilizations, not all at once and not entirely accurately, but in the broad shape of a true thing. The council was convening to amend the human classification. Everyone who had a thought about what that meant had come to watch the thought become official. Vas sat in the same seat she had sat in 8 months ago, same table, same posture, same folded hands. Tors sat beside her and said nothing, which was normal for him, and Drain sat on her other side and looked like a man who had flown in from somewhere and was still slightly in the time zone of wherever he had been. He was drinking coffee. Black. He had been drinking it since he sat down. Thalavos came to the podium. He had spent 2 weeks preparing this session. He had read every military classification in the 6,000-year galactic database. He had consulted senior staff from 12 different species. He had called in 3 retired council taxonomists and made them come in person because some conversations needed faces. He still did not have the right category. He opened the session. He explained the reason for the amendment. He described the Halcyon corridor operation with the careful precision of a person who wanted the record to be absolutely accurate, because in 6,000 years someone would read it and they deserved accuracy. The chamber listened. When he was done, the Cordi Admiral stood up. Raz had asked to speak before the vote. Thalavos had granted it. He had looked when he asked, like a person carrying something they intended to set down publicly, and Thalavos understood that this was important. Raz stood at the floor microphone. He was 9 feet of armor and history and 2,000 years of military tradition, and he stood with all of that visible on him, because he could not take it off and did not want to. He was quiet for a moment. "The humans used us," he said. "I want the record to say this clearly. In the Halcyon Corridor operation, the Cordi combat fleet was a tool in a plan we were not informed of. We fought. We took damage. We did not know we were functioning as a funnel rather than a fighting force." He paused. "I want the record to say that." The chamber was silent. "I also want the record to say," Raz continued, "that I have spent 2 weeks thinking about whether to be angry about it. I have been in battles where the strategy required that some units did not know their full role. It happens. It works. I have done it to others." He looked at the human table, at Voss, who was looking back at him with the same face she always had, steady and patient and giving nothing away. "What I have not done, in 2,000 years, is look at a threat I had not yet encountered and begin solving it 8 months before it arrived." He let that sit. "We fought the Vthcara 3 times, he said. "We asked Asterisk how do we defeat it in battle. We asked that question very well. We lost." A pause. "The humans did not ask that question. They asked a different question and they answered it before we knew we needed the answer." He looked around the chamber. "I do not have a word for what they are. I have been trying to find one. I don't have it." He sat down. The chamber was very quiet in the way chambers are quiet after something honest has been said. Thalavos looked at the amendment document in front of him, the proposed categories, cross-referenced across the full taxonomy. He went through them as he had before, for the chamber's benefit. Warrior class, no declared wars in the current generation, does not fit. Destroyer class, no territorial conquest on record, does not fit. Predator class, insufficient aggression in non-crisis context, does not fit. Guardian class, passive defensive behavior, does not fit and was clearly wrong for reasons that did not need elaborating. He set the document flat. "There is no existing category," he said. "The Council's classification framework has not encountered this profile. I'm therefore calling for a new classification to be created. This has happened 11 times in 6,000 years. It is not done lightly." He looked at Voss. "Ambassador, the Council invites comment before the vote." Voss unfolded her hands. She stood. She did not have notes. She had never needed notes for things she had already decided how to say. "You classified us correctly," she said. 8 months ago. I said so then and I will say so now." A murmur ran around the room. "We are not combatants," she said. "We don't want your territory. We are not interested in your trophies. We don't enjoy the act of conflict. We don't build statues to our battles. We don't name our children after our weapons." She looked around the chamber, 700 species, all of them watching her. "We see problems. We think about problems. We prepare for problems before the problems arrive. And when the time comes, we solve them. Completely. She let that land. What you are describing as a military capability is not how we think of it, she said. It is how we think. It is how we are built. We look at the thing that is coming and we ask, what does it need and how do we take that away? We ask it early. We ask it quietly. We work on the answer for as long as the answer takes. She looked at Thalavos. You said that was terrifying, the last time we spoke. I did, he said. Yes, she said, we know. She sat down. Tors slid a piece of paper across to her. She read it. It was blank. He had given her a blank piece of paper because he thought she might want something to hold. She held it. She folded it once, the way she always folded things. The vote was called. The new classification passed unanimously. The language had taken 3 subcommittee sessions to settle on. It was the most carefully worded entry in the Galactic database. Every word had been argued over. Every word was there because it was the right word and no other word would do. Thalavos read it aloud for the record. Humanity class singular, strategic finality. Note to allied species. Humans do not require provocation to begin preparation. They do not require authorization to begin preparation. They do not fight battles. This should not be confused with passivity. They observe. They calculate. They prepare. They finish. The gap between their preparation and your awareness of the problem is not negligence. It is their method. If you are an allied species and a human has told you there is a problem, there is a problem. If a human asks you to stand back, stand back. If a human says they are working, they are working. They have been working since before you asked. They do not require your fear. They do not require your gratitude. They require only that you understand they have already started. The chamber was still. Outside, somewhere beyond the windows and the walls and the elegant architecture of 6,000 years of civilization, the galaxy turned at the speed it always turned. Trade routes moved. Species went about their days. Children were born into civilizations that did not know they had come close to ending, and had not ended because of people those children would never name. Voss looked at the classification on the screen at the front of the chamber. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been patient about for a long time and have not, until now, let themselves feel. Drain finished his coffee, set the cup down, looked at the screen, said nothing. Tors looked at Voss. Voss looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. She unfolded the blank paper in her hands. She smoothed it out on the table. She picked up her pen. She wrote one line on it. She folded it, put it in her pocket, did not show it to anyone. What it said was, they'll figure it out. The same thing she had written 8 months ago. Because the work was not done. The Vthcara had been the problem they knew about. There would be others, problems still forming at the edges of the galaxy, taking shape in places no one was looking yet, moving towards something that did not know it needed to worry. Somewhere out there, another 41 civilizations were living their lives and not knowing what was coming. Voss knew. Or she would. She was already looking. She always was.